Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I will give us about 30 more seconds to allow others to join us before we kick off this afternoon. So hang tight, and I will be right back to kick us off. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our May monthly policy update. I'm Vanna Cura, Director of Advocacy and Engagement here at Independent Sector. If you are new here, again, welcome. Independent Sector hosts this monthly series as a part of as an exclusive benefit for our members to keep you all updated on what's happening on Capitol Hill, the policy landscape, some policies that we're tracking, and hopefully to give you a sense of some actions that you can take to stay involved and to influence some of the policies that we want to see passed. Today's agenda will begin with an overview of the federal policy landscape. We will specifically focus on things like Reconciliation 2.0, which stalled in the Senate prior to Memorial Day, the Memorial Day holiday, and the possibility for a Reconciliation 3.0 bill later this year. We'll also talk about some of the ways and means activity that we've been seeing that might have an impact on the nonprofit sector, as well as proposed changes or the potential for proposed changes around the Form 990 and the definition of fiscal sponsorship. For those updates, we'll be joined by our partner, Jessica Cameron from Washington Counsel Ernst & Young for a current look at that federal policy landscape. After Jessica, you'll hear from my colleague, Ben Kershaw, with some additional updates on some policies and issues that we are closely tracking. The Southern Poverty Law Center hearing that took place last week, as well as a recent memo by OMB that focused on funding for about 49 nonprofits. We'll also talk about the data privacy bills that I know we talked a little bit about in April's monthly policy update. We'll give a brief update on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and the rules around that from the Department of Education. And then finally, the retirement bill that we have been pursuing and tracking for a while now. So a lot is happening on Capitol Hill, a lot is stalling, but there's a lot for you all to be aware of that may impact your work. And so for that, to kick us off, before I turn it over to Jessica, I do want to remind you all that to ensure sound quality this afternoon, we have muted all of your lines, but we also want to make this feel as interactive as possible and encourage you all to ask questions. There's a lot happening, certainly a lot of issues that we're tracking. And so if there are questions that we can answer about the issues, feel free to drop them in the chat and in the Q&A box, and we will ask your questions aloud. So with that, Jessica, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Vanna, and it's great to be back here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jessica Cameron, and I work at Washington Council. Have been working with IS for quite a number of years now. I think what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what's happening on the Hill, or more importantly, what's not happening on the Hill. What we expect until the end of the year. We'll touch a little bit on the midterm elections. I think, spoiler alert, there's a lot going on. And a lot still to come. And then quickly touch on some regulatory developments that I know others on the call will delve into more deeply. So first off, I think what's really focusing, or what Congress is really focused on right now, is these Reconciliation 2.0 efforts. And really the focus of Reconciliation 2.0 is to fund the Immigration and Customs Enforcement as well as the CBP. For those of you, as a reminder, other parts of the Department of Homeland Security have been funded, but not those particular pieces. And so Reconciliation 2.0 is Republicans' way of moving forward with funding for those pieces with kind of a lower vote threshold. That seemed to kind of be going all right. And then late last week, the White House threw a bit of a wrench in those plans with some additional requests to be put into the Reconciliation 2.0 bill. What were those? Those were requests for additional funding for the White House ballroom, as well as funding for the Anti-Weaponization Fund, which is for individuals targeted by the federal government. So late last week, we saw a number of very conservative Republicans, many of whom are, typically very supportive of the president, come out and express concerns over the structure and size, particularly of the Anti-Weaponization Fund. And so I think next week will be very telling in terms of, and for obvious reasons, I think that there's some controversial issues related to that structure and size, and that likely would tank the ability of Reconciliation 2.0 to move forward. Folks have been working on funding for those two federal agencies for a while now, and the hope is to get that done and moving smoothly. So next week will be very telling in terms of how that goes, whether those two pieces stay, and kind of what the ultimate prospects for 2.0 look like. But that's certainly taking up a lot of oxygen in the room right now. To state the obvious, Reconciliation 2.0 doesn't have any tax pieces. So more specifically for this group, that means there aren't going to be any changes to the tax code with respect to nonprofits or tax-exempt entities per se. But we, I think, are watching in case a 3.0 measure happens where we could potentially see some tax issues there, which I'll also talk about. After 2.0, Reconciliation 2.0, I get a lot of questions about, two questions I get. One is, will there be a Reconciliation 3.0? And whether there will be some type of, if at all, some type of bipartisan package at the end of the year. So let me start with 3.0. I think to state the obvious, you have to probably go through Reconciliation 2.0. So we have to get through this funding debacle before Reconciliation 3.0 happens. And there's, I think from a issue standpoint, there's more of a likelihood, or I think we'd watch very closely to see if any tax issues, any nonprofit tax issues come up in that bill. Something that we'll watch very closely. You might be asking yourself, Jessica, why are we talking so much about reconciliation? Like, I hate talking about reconciliation. This is like, why are we talking? Why are you telling me this, Jessica Cameron? And that's a great question. I think the short answer is that reconciliation is a process that simply allows the Senate to lower the vote thresholds. So lowers the number of required votes that are necessary to pass legislation in the Senate. And so even though Republicans have full government control of the Senate, House, and White House, they don't have the necessary 60 votes for certain types of legislation to pass in the Senate. And so as a result, it's reconciliation it is. That said, reconciliation has a lot of strings attached. There's a process that has to get through. And so that's why you're seeing these bumps in the road in terms of Reconciliation 2.0 moving forward. So that's kind of why we're talking so much about reconciliation. And so I think the next question is, will Reconciliation 3.0 happen? Or what's kind of the news stories keep talking about it. Why are they talking about it so much? And I think at the moment, it looks pretty unlikely that we'd see another big reconciliation package after 2.0. But I think we'll continue to talk about it until August. And the reason is because, you have a number of Republican members who are very focused on keeping their seats in the midterm elections in November. And there's a lot of questions from voters in terms of affordability and certain issues. And so a Reconciliation 3.0 is kind of one last shot at maybe passing some legislation that addresses certain voters' concerns to get them out to the polls, to look favorable with voters. And so that's kind of, and also the fact that this is probably, assuming that one of the chambers flips, this is the last opportunity for full Republican control in a bit. So we'll see what that looks like. But in terms of what could be in there, or what we could maybe more talk about would be things related to affordability. Folks have floated the potential of a gas tax or gas tax holiday and some other things, but I think there's nothing kind of anchored or set in stone yet in terms of a Reconciliation 3.0 bill. So it's kind of a bill without a purpose at the moment, but that could change very quickly. The other option or other thing we're looking for is kind of a potential year-end package, and that's something that we've seen in years past with regards to tax. You typically, before TCJ, that was kind of a cleanup bill every year in terms of certain issues that needed to be, certain provisions that needed to be extended. And I think that's certainly still possible. I think, I put it on the same prospects as 3.0. If we're talking about an end of year package, we're typically talking about a bipartisan end of year package. And if you haven't noticed, Republicans and Democrats are really getting along a whole lot these days. Not that they usually do, but so I think the question is, what bipartisan pieces could we potentially see? And one issue that we've heard talk about is on the retirement front, and maybe some other cleanup pieces that have not been extended and that need to get extended going forward. But those are kind of the pieces that we're looking at. I think for an end of the year package, the likelihood really determines on how members feel after the midterm elections, what the results of the midterm elections look like. And those are just things that we don't yet know about. So that's kind of reconciliation, kind of broad picture. Let me quickly just discuss what we're seeing on Ways and Means and Senate Finance before turning over to Vanna. So I think just on the calendar-wise, next week we have Secretary Bessent, who will be going to Ways and Means and Senate Finance for budget hearings next week. So that is typically an opportunity while the focus is on the budget. Usually members ask a whole variety of questions, and so we could potentially see some questions on the nonprofit sector and some of the work that Treasury is doing with regards to charities and nonprofits, which we'll touch on later. So that's something to keep in mind officially on the calendar. With regards to Ways and Means, we see them are still focusing on a variety of issues. Certainly crypto has been one issue, and I point that out because there are some charitable pieces that folks are currently negotiating. Whether that gets through the finish line from a bipartisan perspective, we'll see, but that's something that, both a regulatory framework and a tax framework are something that Chairman Smith and others have been focused on. We also anticipate some activity in terms of sports tax issues, and those could also include things with regards to tax exempt entities in the sports space, so tax exempt player groups. So we'll see that as well. And then finally, something that we'll see kind of how this plays out, but certainly Chairman Smith has been very focused on looking into nonprofit hospitals, and kind of one area that Republicans have been concerned about is the tax exempt nature of those nonprofit hospitals. There was some legislation, there was a markup a few weeks ago that was supposed to include some legislation that would kind of increase the scrutiny of nonprofit hospitals going forward. But that legislation specifically would have new data reporting requirements for those hospitals related to their spending on charity care. That was ultimately pulled, but something that we continue to watch for going forward, just knowing kind of where Chairman Smith sits on the issue. And then finally, with regards to Senate Finance, it's been relatively quiet, but it looks like they may have a tax administration bill or are working on a markup potentially sometime this year. That hasn't been noticed yet, but certainly some things with regards to kind of IRS practice and procedure that we may be seeing coming down the pipeline. Finally, I'll just note on the regulatory front, certainly a lot of activity that Treasury is doing right now with regards to nonprofits and kind of a variety of different, coming at a variety of different entry points. I'll just note a few of those. And one is that Treasury announced it would publish regulations to change the Form 990, which is the form all tax-exempt entities are required to file each year. I think that's noteworthy in that Treasury already has the authority to typically change forms, tax forms that it has. So we expect some material changes or some material proposed changes in the proposed regs. We don't yet know when those are coming out, but it looks like they'll focus on on the reporting of fiscal sponsorships and government contracts and grants. So we'll see that later. And then there's been a number of updates from OMB with targeting certain nonprofits. I'll let Vanna talk about that more later, but I think the general theme is that, this Treasury has been very focused on nonprofits and kind of scrutinizing nonprofits, and something that we're watching very closely. I will stop there, but happy to answer any questions or to talk further about kind of what we see on the election results, but certainly a lot going on at the moment.
Thank you, Jessica. And I will pause for a moment before turning things over to Ben to see if folks have any questions about either a reconciliation 2.0 or more on the potential for 3.0, or anything on Ways and Means or the Treasury and the 990 issue. So, and Natalie, good question. I was actually going to lead to that, but also ask if Jessica, you had a sense of timing there. And the question is, with changes to the 990s, will there be a comment period? It's anticipated that it'll be a notice of proposed rulemaking from the Treasury. I don't know. I don't have a good sense of timing. Jessica, I don't know if you do either, but I'll see if there's a better sense than what I have. But yes, to your question, Natalie, there will be a comment period.
Mhm. Yes, we expect a comment period. No, I don't have any sense of timing, but the press release came out a few weeks ago, so we're closely watching for when those could get released soon.
Mm-hmm. And to your question, Natalie, we will send out, ways for folks to submit comments or just encouraging our members and larger network to submit comments around that proposed rule. So be on the lookout for it, after the comment or the proposed rule is released. Other questions? Okay. Not seeing any. I'm going to turn it over to Ben to talk through some of our other policy priorities. And I know, Ben, you'll cover the OMB memo that I mentioned in my opening. So I'll turn it over to you to talk through what else we're watching on Capitol Hill.
Great. Thank you, Vanna. Good to be with all of you. Last week on May 20th, the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing. This is the full committee. The hearing is entitled The Southern Poverty Law Center Manufacturing Hate. And this hearing sought to examine this prominent civil rights organization, and I would note IS member, for which we're grateful, and the organization's influence on civil rights and discrimination in recent years. The committee notice also referenced the recent indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center by the Department of Justice, although from following the hearing, that was not a real focus of committee Republicans. It seemed in many ways like this hearing was a rerun of a hearing that the same committee at the subcommittee level held in December. That hearing had a different title, but two of the four witnesses were the same. And much of the conversation in last week's hearing focused on things like SPLC's relationship with federal law enforcement, including with the Biden administration, and around SPLC's hate map, tracking hate organizations that are sponsors of hate. And we flagged this not because we saw any new legislative developments coming out of it, but because it does track with this continued scrutiny of nonprofit organizations and certain nonprofit organizations in particular. Which brings us to this OMB memo released, came out in the press this week. It's a May 13th memo. And this is a memo from the Office of Management and Budget directing all federal departments and agencies to report data on a wide range of federal funding sources. So grants, cooperative agreements, loans, contracts, other awards that were pledged to 49 specific nonprofit organizations. And we have the OMB memo itself lists these organizations, and Southern Poverty Law Center is, unsurprisingly one of them. But there are a lot of other named nonprofit organizations on this list, and so again, like the hearing, we don't name it, because in its own right it is of titanic significance, but certainly continues to be part of a trend, and it's a trend that our CEO and others have pointed out in statements around SPLC's indictment and otherwise. So the 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 drips continue to fall, and we'll see what they make of it, and we'll remain vigilant on it. A couple updates more directly from Congress. So in hearings news, the House Energy and Commerce Committee which has broad jurisdiction in the House of Representatives, yesterday announced a hearing next week that will focus on their data privacy legislation. This is called the Secure Data Act. That hearing's on Wednesday, June 3rd. 10:15 in the morning. And this legislation that the hearing will be about was released in late April. And for our purposes, it is noteworthy that the Secure Data Act exempts all 501c3 nonprofits from its requirements. And that's a big exemption. The outlook for this legislation remains quite murky, I would say at best. This is unlike previous comprehensive data privacy bills. This is supported only by Republicans on the committee. So the hearing we expect to be quite contentious on issues that are not nonprofit issues, but we do expect there to be broad disagreement on that. The next update I have from Capitol Hill for you all is on an issue we've been talking about a lot in recent months, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And if you've been following, you know that the Department of Education finalized a rule granting the Secretary of Education the discretion to identify which nonprofits might have a substantial illegal purpose and disqualify their workers from getting loan forgiveness. So there was an effort in Congress to repeal that rule from going into effect, and last week that effort failed. So the rule is still it's still in the courts, but it was not stopped by Congress. And then the very last update that I have for you is a positive one. I mean, it's not just that if you live in DC, the sun is finally out. So we've been speaking, with this group and others in recent months about some tax credits that are available to for-profit employers, but not to nonprofit employers. And one of those credits is a credit when you start a retirement plan for your employees. There's a bill that would fix this, HR 4548 in the House of Representatives, the Small Nonprofit Retirement Security Act. It would give small nonprofits the same exact tax credit that small businesses can currently claim. It would just allow them to claim it against the payroll taxes, of which nonprofits pay considerable amounts. And so the update for you all is that as of last week, a new co-sponsor has joined that bill in the House, Congressman Greg Steube, a Republican on the Ways and Means Committee from Florida. So that's great news. If your member of Congress is not yet on that bill, you can ask them to do so with just a few clicks through the IS Action Center. So we'll make sure that you all have that link. So those are my updates from Capitol Hill, ending on the positive one.
Thanks, Ben. We love a positive end to our updates there. And I will just echo your last point about encouraging members to co-sponsor the Retirement Security Act. We'll share the link in the chat to make it easy for folks so that you don't have to navigate our website to find our Action Center. But we've got a pre-drafted email for you also. All you have to do is fill in your email address and click send. And we also encourage you to share that with your networks to drum up support for the bill on both the House and Senate side. It's a bipartisan bill, and try to get additional co-sponsors on that. So I will pause and see if anyone has questions for Ben here on anything that we covered. And I'll also note that our June monthly policy update will focus heavily on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and everything that has happened there, background on it, what to expect, the rule, if there's no stoppage before then, if it goes into effect on July 1st. So join us again for our June meeting where we'll talk more in depth about PSLF. I do see a question here about the retirement tax credit for the secure data issue. Is there any idea on why C3s may be exempted? Is this something to discuss with our federal delegation?
It's a good question. And there are prior versions of this bill. I guess I shouldn't say that. Prior comprehensive data privacy bills have not contained a full exemption for 501(c)(3) organizations. And this is I think it's a complicated issue for nonprofits because these bills are being written not with us in mind and not really with small businesses in mind either. They're being written with large data brokers and technology companies in mind that gather and process and sell lots and lots of personal data. Um, and some of the previous bills have been pretty onerous on entities that are covered by those bills. And independent sector had concerns about every nonprofit organization being subjected to the designs of those bills. We felt that bills that were really designed for big for-profit data brokers were not appropriate for all nonprofits. With that said, we do believe that nonprofits have responsibility to operate ethically and to protect the data of the people they serve and their donors. So it's a tricky issue, and our sense would be that your average legislator who you're talking to, if you just happen to be coming to town next month, for example, will not be cited on the impact of comprehensive data privacy legislation on nonprofits. We have a resource page on this issue that we'd be happy to share more about also.
Great, thanks, Ben. Other questions on the current happenings on Capitol Hill? If not, I will move us along to some events and resources that we've got over at IS to share with you all to encourage you to register for. Can you share a link to the OMB memo?
Yes, we'll do. I only have it as a tax notes link. Others may have a more official looking version of it, but the memo itself doesn't have a whole lot of detail in it, but it does name the 49 organizations if you're wondering if you're on there.
Thanks, Ben. All right, seeing no other questions, I'll move us along. And if anything else comes up in terms of questions, feel free to drop them in the questions box and I'll circle back to them. But I do want to also remind you all that I know we have been talking about it in every policy update since January, that our National Summit, of course, is coming up in October. It is in Phoenix, which I am very much looking forward to visit. The theme for this year's summit is the future we build together, and we are excited to announce that registration is finally open. And I do want to encourage you all to begin to go ahead and register before June 30th to get the early bird discount for our summit. We have the link in the chat there. We'll also share it out in our materials after today's policy update. I also want to encourage you all to register for our pre-conference, our public policy advocacy intensive that that just returned for last year's summit. It is our pre-conference the day before the summit begins. It is designed for more experienced advocates and more experienced government relations professionals. And just an all-day workshop intended to not only encourage peer connection, but to be in the form of strategy sessions, particularly as we look forward to the landscape that we'll be facing post-midterm. So in addition to registering for the larger summit, I would encourage you all to register for PPAI. It should be a really great workshop that we're building out for some of our more experienced professionals. So that's the summit. The other update that I had for you all in terms of events and registrations, I've mentioned it the last few updates as well. Our Voices in Action initiative, which started earlier this month on May 5th. That is, of course, our midterm initiative in which we've partnered with Nonprofit Vote, the League of Women Voters, and Alliance for Justice's Boulder Advocacy Program. to bring like I said, our midterm initiative, which was, we started off on May 5th with a kickoff webinar that focused on the do's and don'ts for nonprofits engaging in election year activities, as well as some strategies that organizations can take up to engage this year, both voters as well as candidates. That initiative is going to continue through October with monthly email campaigns beginning on June 8th. And so registration is still open for organizations to join our Voices in Action efforts. There's a link in the chat where you can, if you scroll down about halfway down that page, there's a box for you to sign up for emails. You'll get an email in your inbox every month focused on a different topic related to civic engagement. So voter registration or candidate engagement or get out the vote efforts. And there'll be strategies from our 4 organizations to help you all engage both lawfully and strategically around that given topic, whether it be voter registration, candidate education, and the like. So please join. It's a great initiative. We had a great webinar a couple weeks, and we are just looking to get out as many resources into the sector as possible so that organizations feel encouraged to engage voters and candidates this election season. So I'll pause there to see if anyone has any questions about either Voices in Action or the summit, in particular, our PPAI pre-conference initiative, before I open up for additional questions around some of the policy issues that we've mentioned.
Vanna, I was wondering, for income sector members, how much extra does this awesome pre-summit programming cost if they're coming to the summit?
Wow, Ben, I'm so glad you asked with the questions today. The extra cost for members is $0. Could you believe that? So for nonprofit members, thank you for plugging that, Ben. For nonprofit members, this is all the more reason for you all to register for PPAI for our pre-conference. It is completely free for nonprofit IS members to register for PPAI. So I would encourage you all to come in the extra day, spend some time connecting with your peers, experienced GR professionals, and learning, developing strategy for post midterms, and seeing Ben and I and many other folks in the field, many other experts we're going to recruit to speak at PPAI. So again, it's completely free, and you'll see PPAI registration on that same link for the larger summit. Just select that option as you're registering for the summit. So thank you, Ben. That was a great plug. Any other questions from folks on the call related to anything here? I see an LOL from our exchange there, no question though. Anything else before I wrap us up this afternoon? Lots of updates happening here in Washington, and so we want to make sure all hearts and minds are clear in terms of our strategy and what you all can be doing in response to some of the things that we've mentioned. All right, seeing nothing, are there opportunities to sponsor? Lords, if you would send me an email that I could forward on to our team here at IS, I will relay the question. I'm sure there are opportunities. I just am unsure how to go about connecting you to them, and maybe Ben knows. It seems like you're typing something, but send me an email and I'll get that into the right hands. And get you that answer there. I just don't know the appropriate channels to go through to be able to sponsor the summit, but we certainly welcome it. All right, doing a final question check here before I sign us off. And just another reminder, our June monthly policy update will focus on PSLF. I know that there's a lot coming down with that rule, and so we want to make sure you have the information that you need moving forward to know if and how you might be impacted with that rule from the Department of Education. So that will take place on June 25th at 2 p.m. All the information will be out in an email, including speakers, in the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that. And I see the plan was to encourage others to sponsor. Appreciate that. We'll get you the information on sponsorship. I will follow up via email with you. All right, seeing no other questions, thank you all for joining our May monthly policy update. I hope you all found this helpful. We will send out a follow-up email with links to the resources as well as some of the pieces of legislation that we discussed here today. So thank you all, and we will see you again on June 25th. Have a great day.